By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Few phrases in our culture are as powerful and widely known as these. For many, hearing a minister say these words is an amazing, life-changing moment, unmatched by many things. One moment you're single, the next you're married. But what if I told you that Catholics don't use this phrase, and never have, because it actually undermines what we think about marriage? When we think about weddings, our minds usually go to an image of a bride in a white dress, walking down the aisle to this song, beautiful flowers all around, a reading from the letter to the Corinthians about love, maybe a flower girl and a ring bearer, and of course, a minister saying the ever so important words, I now pronounce you husband and wife, right before the bride and groom kiss. These traditional images of weddings are so ingrained into our minds that it's hard to imagine a wedding without them. And yet not a single tradition I mentioned is required for a wedding in the Catholic Church. And in fact, the song Here Comes the Bride and the words I now pronounce you are actually forbidden in Catholic ceremonies. The reason for this has everything to do with what Catholics understand a marriage to be, a covenant between a couple and God. For this, we look to Scripture.
So in the Scriptures, marriage is described as a covenant. In fact, from the opening chapters of Genesis, the creation of woman in Genesis 2 is all described in covenantal language. Marriage throughout Scripture is described as a covenant, and then that is used as a symbol to signify the relationship between God and his people, between Yahweh and the people of Israel, in the New Testament between Christ and the church.
This is a very powerful image for couples being married. Just as God came to his people and made a covenant with them, forming an unbreakable relationship, so too does God call them together to form a solemn bond, a covenant. But what exactly is a covenant?
It's not just a contract, it's not just a legal exchange of some kind. In a covenant, I make an oath. I promise myself, I promise the whole of myself faithfully to another, in this case to a spouse, before God as well as before human witnesses. And then that oath is going to be reflected, expressed, lived out in our life together.
So unlike contracts or agreements in which people exchange goods or services, a covenant is the act of giving oneself, the totality of one's being. And because we're always growing, always changing, a covenant has no endpoint. It's not like a phone contract or a service agreement that can be made void. A covenant exists before God and his people for as long as both parties are still alive and able to give of themselves. So how does one enter into such a covenant, you ask? Actively and with words.
The essence of a Catholic marriage or a wedding is the free exchange of consent, properly witnessed between a man and a woman. So when the spouses say to one another, I take you to be my husband, my wife, I promise to be true to you in good times and in bad, in sickness and health, I will love you and honor you all the days of my life. Those words are, the term some scholars use is a performative utterance. They cause what they say. So I take you, that's when this man and this woman bind themselves together. Actually, God acts through them to join them together into this new reality, this one flesh unity of husband and wife.
In my opinion, this performative utterance is pretty amazing. For starters, it just sounds really cool. Performative utterance. And it is. Think about what it means. When I utter something, something is performed. In other words, it is by the nature of saying something that the very thing comes to exist. In the case of marriage, this is exactly what happens. When the couple exchanges their vows, giving of oneself to the other, nothing more is needed. Before God and in front of witnesses, the oath makes them married. Where have I seen this before?
I got married. I didn't want to. It all happened so fast.
Never happened.
What?
Never happened.
But it did. I was there. This old man said man and wife.
Did you say I do?
Oh, no. So we'll skip that part.
Then you're not married. You didn't say it. You didn't do it.
Who knew that the 1980s cult classic understood Catholic theology so well? Because the exchange of vows is the essence of the sacrament, if either one doesn't consent to the marriage and freely enter into the covenant, it didn't happen. The fact that the bishop in the movie said man and wife seems irrelevant, even out of place. Think about the traditional words again. By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Given what we've said about the marriage covenant, this just doesn't work for Catholics. The minister takes the active role, he or she is doing the something. The couple is passive, marriage is something that happens to them rather than something they enter into. And put together, it means that the validity of marriage itself is dependent on the power of the minister. This, for Catholics, is just not the way we see the role of the minister.
In our understanding, it is not the priest or deacon or bishop who is the primary minister of the sacrament. He is a witness on behalf of the church. It is the couple themselves.
And so with that as our focal point, the very essence of the ceremony, everything else should point to that moment, preparing those present with songs, gestures, and readings that symbolize what is about to take place. Unfortunately, this doesn't always happen, and sometimes the traditional things we find nice and pretty are irrelevant at best and contradictory at worst. Take, for instance, the opening procession. It's traditional for the father of the bride to walk his little girl down the aisle and hand her to the groom. But does that say what we want it to say? If we're trying to highlight the fact that these two people are coming together freely, conferring a sacrament upon themselves as equals, maybe it'd be more appropriate that the couple process down the aisle together, accompanied by their families.
That seems to better capture the biblical understanding of Genesis 2:24. A man will leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and they'll be one flesh. So it's both families giving a son, a daughter to each other. That way of expressing this captures it a little better, instead of what some people can take away from the groom waiting at the altar, the bride being escorted down the aisle by her father, is handing over the control of this woman from her father to her husband. I don't think we want to say that, and it's certainly possible to engage in that form without expressing that.
But that's not the only thing that seems a bit out of place next to the symbolism of the covenantal vows. When we look at many of our traditional aspects of weddings, we find that their origins are often not in the church, and many times symbolize things that we may not want to continue. There's the expensive white dress.
Maybe traditional, certainly not necessary. Simplicity can be a wonderful way to celebrate and express a wedding.
There's the song, Here Comes the Bride.
Here Comes the Bride suggests that the focus of the event is the woman getting married, the bride herself, when in the church's understanding, the focus is it's Christ acting in and through the man and woman, joining them together.
Keeping the bride and groom apart before the wedding.
A little silly, probably, in our culture, because dates from a time when marriages were often arranged, and so if you had never seen your bride prior to the wedding, and you caught a glimpse and decided you didn't like what you saw, you might decide not to go through with it, so it would be bad luck for the bride. Most brides and grooms in our culture have seen one another before.
Ring bearers and flower girls.
I like leaving ring bearers to Tolkien. Flower girls, all of this is these are trappings that the wedding industry has created to encourage people to have bigger, more expensive weddings. And again, simple can be better.
And what about the bridal party, all wearing the same expensive dress that they'll never wear again?
Dates from a time when it was thought that evil spirits might harass the bride and groom on their wedding day, so that if you dress all the bridesmaids like the bride and the groomsmen like the groom, you might confuse the evil spirits. If you're concerned about evil spirits interfering with your wedding, there are prayers of deliverance and exorcism that can be effective, but that custom probably not so effective at warding off evil spirits.
Probably not. And yet these things, as well as so many others, have become so essential to the wedding ceremony that we'd probably be confused if we didn't see them. Is there anything wrong with having the bride look beautiful or involving the kids in the wedding? Of course not. Like anything, it can be done well, bringing people deeper into the mystery of the sacrament in a prayerful way. But they can also distract and even contradict the very thing that we're celebrating, becoming more about wealth, status, vanity, or simply throwing a great party. My advice, keep it simple. Focus on what the couple is undertaking and make the whole day a reflection of that. Prayerful, humble, and joyful. Thanks to Dr. John Grabowski for agreeing to this interview and all he and his wife do to prepare couples for marriage. If you're planning a wedding or would simply like to learn more about the Catholic Church's approach to marriage, the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops has a great website that has lots of information on it. But before you click away, be sure to click here to subscribe and check the description for links to my blog and Facebook pages.